the congratulations. Mr. Anil Panagude, congratulations.
Mr. Joseph.
I'm Johnson Pérez.
Mr. Johnson Pérez, thank you so much. You can hear me loud and clear. You can see the screen?
Indeed.
Okay. So very good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to warmly welcome you all to today's working paper presentations organized by Department of Economics, University of Colombo. At the outset, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to Senior Professor Amirthalingam, Head of the Department of Economics. We sincerely appreciate your presence and the continued support for research and postgraduate scholarship within the department. I would also like to acknowledge Senior Professor S.P. Premaratna, whose academic vision led to introduction of the working paper series, providing an important platform for sharing ongoing research and fostering scholarly dialogue within the department. My warm welcome is also extended to all members of the academic staff of the Department of Economics, our authors and presenters, and all participants joining us today. So, the purpose of this working paper presentation is not only to share research findings, but also to encourage a discussion, critical engagement, and constructive feedback. So, we highly encourage everyone to actively participate during the discussion sessions. So, today we are pleased to present working paper 14. The title is India Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, Bilateral Trade Performance, and Lessons for Sri Lanka, a systematic literature review. So the paper has been authored by Mr. A. Panagoda and Emeritus Professor Sirimal Abhiratna. And the paper has been reviewed by Senior Professor S.P. Premaratna and Dr. I.W. Ratnayaka. We sincerely appreciate their valuable contribution to the review process. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer session. Thereafter, we will invite comments from the reviewers and the head of the department. Without a further delay, it's my pleasure to invite Mr. A. Panagoda and Emeritus Professor Sirimal Abhiratna to present their paper. Mr. Panagoda and Professor Abhiratna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Shara, for that kind introduction. Thank you so much, Professor Premaratna, Professor Sirmala Beratna, Dr. Vasana Ratnayaka, Shihara, who is hosting this, and also to Chatula Nayana Lochana to have arranged this particular presentation. Now, as you all can see, the topic is India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, Bilateral Trade Performance and Lessons for Sri Lanka. Lessons for Sri Lanka. So you'll find the background on the research. You'll find the FTAs or free trade agreements create both positive and negative impacts on countries. It accrue unevenly to participating economies. Depending on the size of the economy, depending on the size of the country, you find that these trade agreements benefit, but both countries ought to benefit from these particular free trade agreements. It facilitates goods, services, investment flows, driving expansion of employment and GDP growth. But of course, countries like Sri Lanka, as we say, for smaller import-dependent economies like Sri Lanka, FTAs can also expose domestic industry to intensified competition because there will be investments coming, there will be a lot of competition with the outsiders. So adequate safeguards and regulatory provisions have to be made when you are of an asymmetric situation. Now you find India, Sri Lanka is a small country comparing to India, which is the asymmetric situation. Now the research problem is that has Sri Lanka effectively benefited from the agreement after 25 years? Now this, despite long-standing implementation, concerns remain about Sri Lanka's gains, particularly in the sectoral performance, trade balance, and structural constraints. the central research problem is to examine Sri Lanka's trade performance under the ISFTA and identify underlying challenges that have influenced its outcomes. Now, I must say at this particular point, as a primer, that now it has been signed for 20 or 26 years to be exact, was signed in 1998, and then it came into operation in 2000 March. From that year onward, there were improvements. But we never reached from Sri Lanka to India the tradable goods value up to $1 billion, except coincidentally or incidentally, only in 2025 that we had 1 billion, passing $1 billion of tradable goods going to India. But India had a fair share. They had about $4 billion, on the other hand, exporting to Sri Lanka. So there is a sort of an imbalance, and we were trying to look into what is the reason that Sri Lanka has not been able to penetrate into the Indian market. So let me go through the next slide. So objective of this review to comprehensively evaluate the impact of ISFTA on Sri Lanka's trade performance and sectoral dynamics, diagnosing the internal and external limitations that have shaped its outcomes, and to inform or to formulate strategic policy recommendations for future trade negotiations. Now, as you all know, it is not only the ISFTA which we signed we came into operation in 2000 March. We have also signed up with Pakistan, Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement is there. We have signed with Singapore, which is not really operational at the moment. And then we also signed up with Thailand, which is not really operational at the moment. So lessons learned from this particular, or diving into the real issues of why ISFTA is not being so generous to Sri Lanka is something that we need to look into. So which says evaluate trade performance and sectoral dynamics under ISFTA, internal external limitations, and strategic recommendations for future negotiations. The main aim of the agreement was to boost trade between the two countries by liberalizing trade, removing or reducing tariff and non-tariff barriers. Now, incidentally or coincidentally, once again, is that when we signed in 1998 with India, it was their first bilateral trade agreement, and so for Sri Lanka as well. But India has gone and signed more than 15, 16 trade agreements thereafter, which we have only 4 at the moment from a bilateral point of view. So the idea of having an FTA is to get market access for importers and exporters to expand the basket of tradable goods on both sides of the bilateral border. Then, of course, the economic benefits, growth, jobs, living standards, improvement, GDP growth, so on and so forth. Then, of course, the regional economic integration. We can get into the SAARC. We already with SAFTA, South Asian Free Trade Agreement. So more integration with them as well. Then, of course, the trade liberalization means tariff and non-tariff reforms, reduce barriers, paving the way for more orderly cross-border commerce. Orderly cross-border commerce. I want to emphasize on that. Now, this PRISMA, which is the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis, which is the way how we have identified the most important or critical documents for this particular exercise. Identification, screening, and ultimately, we found 39 related articles, very related articles for this particular topic, for this particular subject. I'm not going to talk about PRISMA flow, but this is the flow that we have. First, you identify, screening, and then, of course, include the most relevant articles in this particular exercise. Now, in this exercise, we found agreements with the multilateral GATT-WTO agreement. Now, that is the cornerstone for trade to increase from the late 1940s, early 50s to up to now. Having a multilateral trade organization, GATT, and then it became WTO in 1995. They're the cornerstone, and they're one of the most important area called the most favored nation clause, MFN. Try to be good to everyone, or as far as the duties and things are concerned. Then, of course, the economic determinants for FTAs, negotiation of FTAs, regional trade agreements, which came after the multilateral or the WTO. There were regional trade agreements also propped up. At the beginning was NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. Then now is this USMCA, US, Mexico, and Canada. Then, of course, the preferential trade agreements like the GSP and the GSP pluses. Then, of course, we have bilateral FTAs, India, Sri Lanka, yes, FTA, and I took Japan and Korea as well. They also have a number of bilateral and regional trade agreements or comprehensive economic partnerships. The challenges, the non-tariff barriers, which we'll be talking a little bit more at length. Once again, the number of the trade agreements started to emanate from the WTO or the GATT agreement in 1947-48, and were on a non-discriminatory basis. In other words, if you're importing, exporting from certain countries, you got to sort of you need to be fair by everyone. You cannot have one particular duty rate for one and another for the same product. Then came the regional trade agreements, because multilateral trade, WTO was large, and then there were these regional trade agreements that came by, like, of course, for South Asia was the South Asian Free Trade Agreement under the SAARC. Then, of course, the bilateral trade agreements, which we are more connected with one-to-one countries. Then, of course, the unilateral or the preferential trade agreements like the GSP and the GSP plus, which is non-reciprocal. Now, in this particular exercise, we found how to negotiate FTAs. Then, of course, growth of FTA is rising, international trade. If you see some statistics shows from 1950 to 2025, there's a huge influx of trade between countries over the last so many decades. Then the regional trade agreements, the blocks, the regional blocks like the ASEAN. Then, of course, there was this RCEP was there. Then, as I said, the preferential trade agreements. And the heart of our topic is basically the ISFTA, India Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, comparison with some FTAs of Japan and Korea. Now, 5 recurring challenges in FTA implementations. One have the non-tariff and non-tariff barriers, or we have non-tariff measures as well. Then, of course, the rules of origin, to say that this is a product of Sri Lanka. You cannot import something from somewhere and change the label and export to another country to gain that particular concession or the benefit that you will get of a free trade agreement. Then the spaghetti bowl situation. Now, that is a bit of a crisscross situation where you will find that when you sign with number of countries, number of trade agreements, regional or multilateral, or for that matter, bilateral, you will find the rules of origin plays a major role. So you need to manage that. With Singapore having 29 FTAs, 14 bilateral and 15 multilateral or regional trade agreements, they're managing that very well. So we need to, this spaghetti bowl situation came up because there were these rules of origin used to have an impact on how you want to, and that can also lead to what we call the trade, not creation, but trade diversion, where there is a lesser duty, probably that particular exporter will export it to that country which has a lower duty rate. Then, of course, the border protection efficiency. Now, that plays a major role. If you take the India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, both in India as well as in Sri Lanka, the customs or the border protection agency have to be very, very careful in identifying whether this is a Sri Lankan product or whether this is someone coming from somewhere trying to penetrate into the Indian market. Same here for Sri Lanka, in order for them to achieve this particular, to achieve this free trade agreement to be successful. Then, of course, the policy implications and implementation, there's a gap because we need to make sure that some of these trade that is coming under FTA or even non-FTA can have an impact on the local industries. So you need to safeguard that industry, and then you find both countries have taken some type of a negative list, so to speak, in the India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement. The same 5 challenges that was on a broader scope, the same 5 challenges do apply to the Sri Lankan context as well. Non-tariff measures, non-tariff barriers. When say non-tariff measures, usually has a sort of a has an effect where they will try to protect the environment and the health sector, health areas when you're importing or exporting products from one country to the other. Then the rules of origin. Now, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, to gain the Indian, to go to India or to achieve to get the free trade concessions to India, we need to add a value addition of 35%. If 10% of the raw materials are coming from, which we call the DVA, right? Where if you have 10% coming from India, let's say it's fabric, then of course you have to, locally you have to input only 25% as far as the rules of origins are concerned. Then the spaghetti bowl situation, you have to manage the ISFTA, SAFTA, PSFTA, then of course the GSP plus is there. So these are all overlapping requirements that we need to closely monitor. From the border protection to all the other institutions should have a very clear path. How are we going to make use and to ensure that the exporters know what exactly how to apply, when to apply. And you find that in the Sri Lankan context, even having the ISFTA, giving concessions for our 4,000 odd HS codes or line items, you find our we are utilizing only between 60 to 70% under ISFTA. So there's a reason why is that? Why aren't we using all the HS codes? Because one reason, of course, is our export basket has not really expanded. So that's one thing. Then, of course, the border protection efficiency. There are a lot of institutions involved when you're importing something or exporting something. And I think these have been discussed at various forums. And incidentally, I think there's going to be the National Export Development Plan will be unveiled next week. Where we are trying to right now, this year, according to the according to the Export Development Board, we are trying to achieve overall both tradable and the services up to $20 billion, right? And then they want to double it up to around 36 billion by 2030. So this particular plan will be unveiled next week by the Export Development Board. So to see what exactly that is there. So a balanced verdict and the case to revisit, I have said a definite impact on bilateral trade in both imports. Yes, we must agree that from 2000 onwards, there was the trade growth was there, but India had the fair share. Before and after, those open more orderly trade guided by rules and regulations covering many sectors and industries. Now, this rule base came not only for this particular trade, but it was the rule base which came from the GATT agreement, and then the WTO, which was formed in 1995. It was rule based, where you have to conform to certain rules and regulations when you are doing the imports and exports between countries. Despite the deficit, India exports more to Sri Lanka than imports, and paved the way for both sides to leverage strengths, weaknesses, and factor endowments. The agreement is asymmetric. As we know, India is a large country, but that is for Sri Lanka, I strongly feel having an FTA is a vehicle for us to get into number of geographies, number of markets. And then, of course, to the markets where we can go a lot more easily with less duties and less barriers that we can penetrate into those markets. So that this is one vehicle how we can that's why you could ask most of the other countries, they have lot more bilateral and bilateral and regional trade agreements they have signed up. And also with RCEP and various other trading blocs, they are together. And I think Sri Lanka is trying to get into the RCEP. And then one thing must say that right now with all these issues which are facing under ISFTA, we have analyzed certain areas, and now it will be discussed at ETCA level, Economic Technical Cooperation Agreement. They have had 14 rounds, and before that there was this SEPA, not SEPA, sorry, Professor Abhirat, SEPA. This is for Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. I believe it came up in 2015, but it was shelved by most of some professional organizations did not want that to come in as services part of it. So ETCA is now being discussed 14 rounds, and they're trying to bring in the services, investments, tech cooperation, tech collaboration, so on and so forth. Because now most of the agreements that are coming up includes not only the tradable goods, but also the services that has to be offered from both sides. So they have to take a step back and say, yes, we will allow you up to a certain extent for some of the professionals to come into Sri Lanka and work as far as here. Now, as also this is a timely topic, I say, because Sri Lanka is the crossroad of an economic issue crisis. So we need more dollars to come in. So export is one way of our attracting more exports. Will attract more dollars into the country, much required dollars. We cannot depend only on the remittances part, not only on tourism. And for that, we should be able to get the foreign direct investments into Sri Lanka, provided we have that climate to bringing the foreign investments into Sri Lanka, which can create, for example, if you go to Biagama, this Dilaru, this particular company, right? They print currencies for various other countries, not only for Sri Lanka. I mean, they are producing euro, they are producing, and they're exporting from there. So likewise, for us to attract the foreign direct investments, and then when they come into Sri Lanka, if they find that we have 10 agreements, 15 agreements, they know we have 15 markets for them also to supply to those particular countries. So here the initial agreement granted meaningful concessions to Sri Lanka, and these flourished in the early stages. Yeah, at the beginning, I think we grew from 2000 onwards, but then it became stalled and it has not been really looked at. So I emphasize the matter that you can have all the export development plans unless and until we have the markets to reach, because markets to go into, it's going to be quite difficult for us. However, in the last 2.5 decades, growth has slowed year on year and demands closer analysis. So why we need to understand what the reasons why we have not been. And the other thing, of course, this is the country, India, is stone's throw for us. Within a few hours, we can reach most of the ports of India. India is also the fastest growing economy in the world, I think, which has a GDP of $4.1 trillion, fastest growing economy, and especially the southern part of it. And we are not going through any choke points. I mean, we can easily cross to any of the Indian ports. So, and there is the fastest growing middle income group in India as well. So on that note, that's my presentation. I'd like to thank Professor Premaratna for arranging this, and Professor Sirimal, my supervisor, and who have helping me on this, Dr. Vasana Ratnayaka, Chatula Nayana Lochana, my PhD colleagues, and all others who have joined and participated in this particular program. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Panagoda, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. We will now proceed to the question and answer session. I would like to invite participants to raise questions or comments. Kindly introduce yourself before making your contribution. Please feel free to share your thoughts or raise questions.
Yeah, the floor is open for questions or any comments.
Yes, Mr. Panagoda, this is Marika. You started the discussion with investments and connection to the trade, could you clarify a little more on what kind of FDI or some influence that you found in literature, please? Thank you.
FDIs are important. I mean, if you go to most of the other countries, peer countries, they have developed their economies by, of course, opening their barriers to trade, and they have made the climate, as far as the business climate, conducive for them to come and invest in that particular country. And if that country has number of trade agreements, they know they have lots of areas that they can serve or supply, or I mean they can produce for those countries. So investment is a must, and investment per se will be discussed more. I think there are some Indian investments already in Sri Lanka, so are some Sri Lankan investments in India as well. But with ETCA, Economic Technical Cooperation Assistance Agreement, probably that will be given more. That will be more information will be given on that area. Thank you, Mr. Mareka.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me also a little bit elaborate things. And if I'm rightly, you start with this. This is a very comprehensive report also. I read, and you start with the 100+ article review. And like you said, it came down to 39 and the review based on that. Is of course, like you said, the India is the largest trade partner with Sri Lanka. But the fact is that the benefit is asymmetric, which means Sri Lanka mostly import, but it should be other way around. Why? Because the India is the largest market. It could be Sri Lanka export more, but it did not happen, unfortunately. I don't know, maybe your literature review, because this is on literature review, based on maybe why this, and also so much it's this asymmetric benefit reads some tap areas, the market. What kind of a market may be the potential, for example, some SMEs and capture the Indian market, or any barriers. I don't know whether you came across when you did the literature review. And also what the future, for example, now with this Sri Lanka has a big issue in the import and export basket, and improve the situation in more export to India. What kind of strategies Sri Lankan government or policymakers can look at? The questions remain. I think you may study later on, but maybe you can answer also some little bit elaborate. And the literature review itself, like you said, we can look at the different pillars. Your systematic literature review really use the methodology. And if you look at the using different pillars, for example, if you look at the historical waves of the trade agreement in India and Sri Lanka, maybe some differences you might notice, and also different thematic areas. For example, tariff, non-tariff barriers, and the benefit, the macroeconomic impact. I wonder whether you notice kind of different pillars, interest from future researchers for the studies also. And one of the things I noticed your review working paper. This working paper already anyone can go through the online available, and the department printed version also there. You clearly identify the gap, and this gap, I think you, as a PhD student, you are going to fill some of the gap. Maybe I would like to put one question, like several questions I do that, but specific questions, like I said, the semestic benefit get in, and what kind of potential market, if someone already here like exporters, what kind of markets they can dig in, and also the policymakers, what strategies Sri Lanka can use to enter this niche or untapped market. Thank you very much.
Professor Premratha, thank you so much for your comment, and I'm waiting to see. I'm not sure whether anyone had the preview for this National Export Development Plan, which is to be unveiled next week. They are talking about the horizontal pillar as the trade facilitation, because their trade facilitation seems to be a challenge in Sri Lanka. And then, of course, the verticals, there are about 8 or 9 verticals: mineral-based products, rubber-based products, then food and beverages, spices, electronic equipment. Then you find the vehicle components, and I think those are planned. Those are the planned products that are to be produced in Sri Lanka to serve not only the Indian market, maybe for the other markets as well. So, and also to find out what exactly the issues and real problems. This is why I'm doing my primary data collection, meeting up with the exporters and asking them the real burning questions. Why aren't you? Why aren't you here? There is an agreement where there are 4,000 line items, and how many items are we really exporting to India? So that's something that we need to dig into, and I will be digging into, meeting up with especially in my primary data collection. Those will be uncovered. Professor Premaratna, thank you for your comments as well.
So, Professor Premaratna, thank you very much, sir, for your valuable remarks as the first review of the paper. And thank you all for engaging discussion and thoughtful questions. IW Ratnayaka, madam, the second review of the paper, Dr. Vasana Ratnayaka is here. Do you have any comments on the paper?
Yes, as a reviewer, so I observed that this review highlights both the opportunities and the challenges associated with the trade liberalization, while the agreement has contributed to the expansion of bilateral trade and economic cooperation. And also the findings of this study contribute to persisting structural constraint and also the implementation challenges and the need for complementary domestic policies to ensure that the benefits of trade are distributed more broadly across the sectors of the economy. And the lessons identified in this review are particularly important for the policymakers to engage in design and negotiations of the future trade agreements. So I would like to congratulate both authors, especially Anil Panagoda. You have done a good job. So I have one question to discuss actually, Mr. Panagoda. So in your paper, you have mentioned that the global value chains and FDI. So if Sri Lanka cannot compete with India's economics of scale in manufacturing, so that one also mentioned in the Sirivardhana 2024 as well, should Sri Lanka use the ISFTA to attract Indian FDI to become hub for components rather than trying to compete with final goods? So any thought of that?
Yeah, I think the joining the global value chains, because nowhere in the country, I mean, you take an iPhone, you take any particular product, no particular country is producing all the components. It has been sort of outsourced to various countries, and then they assembled in couple of few places. So I think because India is attracting a lot of FDIs, I think last year, I think about about 20 odd billion dollars worth of FDIs have walked into, have been attracted by the Indian market or Indian government. So if we without making, that's why I think in the export development plan they are talking about the automobile components. So not to make an automobile as well, because we do not have the economies of scale to sell everything in Sri Lanka. So I think, yes, the global value chains is one of the way that we can definitely make use of India. And I keep pressing this particular point. Being in the logistics shipping industry for over 40 years, I know how fast we can go to an Indian port, and how well we can do business with them because our freight cost is less. But which then that's a big advantage than going through to US or Europe, diverting through the choke points, not going through the choke points, which is if you want to go to Europe, or to US. Now it can take 35 to 45 days under the current global scenario. So, and also I want to check with Professor Premaratna as well. I think he was talking about in one of his TV interviews, he was talking about the transactional cost in Sri Lanka, which has a big bearing on the cost of production in Sri Lanka. Am I right, Professor Premaratna?
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly.
Sorry, sir, I didn't hear.
Yes, the transaction cost is the key area in Sri Lanka, because I think that now with the current situation, it's coming so many circulars and regulation, is transaction cost become more and more. That's one of the key area, especially when I did the research and doing research SME sector as one of the, the huge component of the production, part of the production cost that I think government and the policymakers really look at that. Yeah, you're right.
Thank you, sir. Professor Sirimal, are you there, Professor Sirimal?
No, he's not there.
He's not there. He was supposed to join. Any other questions from the floor, please?
Mr. Panagoda, may I raise a question?
Yeah.
Now, we have been operating these agreements for some time now. Has anyone studied the impact of the non-tariff barriers as far as Sri Lanka is concerned? And I also would go further, that is, does India have any further agreements with the SAARC countries? And how have the non-tariff barriers been imposed on those countries by India? Any idea?
Yeah. Now, to answer that question in a more complete form, there are two areas we call the non-tariff measures and non-tariff barriers. Now, non-tariff measures talks about which has an impact to a country as far as health-wise or environmental-wise. In other words, let me give an example, a simple example. Let's say if you want to export anything to India, let's say plants or plants-related items, you need to obtain a phytosanitary certificate, which is a worldwide requirement. After fumigating that plant, you're exporting only plants, not any insects or whatever. So that phytosanitary certificate is a non-tariff measure. And of course, if you're exporting any product that is related to pharmaceuticals or related to food items, they will want HACCP, and so those are current. Then comes to the non-tariff barriers. Now, in the agreement itself, as non-tariff barriers, we have quotas. Now, for our tea, for our apparel, for our paper, for desiccated coconut, and so on and so forth, and which means now the one of the things that I'm not sure how we have not been able to negotiate. We have apparel 8 million pieces from 2000 onwards up to now. We have been given a quota of 8 million pieces. Now, the sad part of it, of course, is that a pair of socks is taken as 2 pieces. I'm not sure why we were not been able to negotiate that either. So our negotiation skills was there. So non-tariff barriers are there, and then there also can be hidden barriers. Whereas if you go from port to port, from state to state, there can be issues created by the border protection agencies. So these can be only uncovered, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, by doing the primary research part of it, meeting with the exact exporters or importers to see what they are facing it. Now, to answer your second question, India has about 15 free trade agreements, and they are negotiating with another 12 at the moment. Now, obviously, they will be looking into, or they will have to look into the non-tariff and tariff barriers when dealing with them as well. So I have not really done that particular area to see what are the tariff and non-tariff barriers that has an impact with their other 15 plus the 12 they are negotiating. Mr. Pires, I have not really gone into that, to be very honest on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the floor, please? Any of the colleagues or any other people who have joined, any particular questions with, because this is as I mentioned to you, I keep saying this is the vehicle, one of the vehicles for us to capture markets, going into new markets, then of course to increase our export basket, so on and so forth. So these trade agreements which emanated from, as I mentioned, from the GATT to the WTO and the whole gamut of it, which I already explained, I believe is an important area. And then, as I said, the National Export Development Plan is coming. They are talking about 8 pillars, 8 vertical pillars and 1 horizontal pillar. But I'm not sure whether they have touched on the markets, how they can capture the markets. What are the new markets that they are going into is something that we will see only next week when they unveil the new export development plan, which they are planning to generate $36 billion worth of exports. Right now, EDB is trying to achieve 20 billion by 2026, which is a big question mark. And then by 2030, they are trying to achieve $36 billion. Any other questions from the floor, please? Any clarifications, questions, comments?
So, okay, it seems there are no any more questions from the audience. So, I would like to thank Dr. I.W. Ratnayaka for providing comments on the paper, and thank you all for engaging discussion and thoughtful questions. As we come to the end of today's session, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to the authors, Emeritus Professor Sirimal Aberatna and Mr. A. Panagoda for sharing their research, to reviewers for their valuable scholarly contributions, and to all participants for their active engagement. I also extend our sincere appreciation to Senior Professor Amirthalingam for his leadership of the department and continued encouragement of research initiatives. Our special thanks also goes to Senior Professor S.P. Premaratna for introducing the work in paper series and for his continued intellectual guidance in strengthening research dissemination within the department. Finally, I would like to thank all members of the academic staff, participants, and colleagues for your presence and valuable contribution to the discussions today. Your engagement is essential in fostering meaningful academic dialogue and strengthening the research culture of the department. On behalf of the Department of Economics, University of Colombo, I again thank you for joining us today. We look forward to your participation in future work in paper series presentation. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.